How do we walk through the gates? How do we walk through the gates? There are images, as you just heard, of gates in some of the readings this morning, Acts and John's Gospel. How do we cross from one place to another? To answer this rather obscure question at the moment, let's start at the starting place with confliction, the reality of confliction. It was E.B. White, the American writer. Remember English class, The Elements of Style? Or Charlotte's Web, right? White's probably responsible for inspiring many young readers to a lifelong habit of reading and becoming librarians, probably, with the publication of Charlotte's Web in 1952. But he famously said, quote, "I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve or save the world and a desire to enjoy or savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day." It's so good, so perceptive. The elements of style there point to the human predicament, yes? That underline our lives. How do we live in a world of confliction with conviction? And how do we approach the day when we are facing tough times, when we are in the midst of a pandemic or an endemic, whatever we are in? Or we have health issues. I'm talking about things in this community. Or we live alone and we have diminishing financial resources and we're afraid. Or we have deadlines looming and we're stressed. Or we're dismantled ourselves. Not structural racism, but dismantled ourselves. When a young teenager searches out certain people based on the color of their skin, where they're buying food, to do you know what, decided that they are worthy of hate. Living in such times with such hate, such racism, such division, such greed for self-preservation at the expense of others, demonizing the other, indeed challenges our ability to savor the world, to enjoy the world, and challenges our fortitude in the midst of fatigue and discouragement to improve and save the world. Remember the word courage as we prayed in the opening collect today about our hearts. It means the heart. Discouragement. And yet here we are, right? This is where we live. Here we are, waking up and finding it hard to plan the day. And yet, with or without a plan, we leave our mark, even if we do nothing, right? This response to this predicament seems to me a core of Jesus' teaching. That the world is conflicted, that we are conflicted, and how do we walk through it? What is your plan? How do you walk through the gate of confliction? Both the Acts reading today, a glimpse at the pre-institutional early church with Paul and Philippi on the Sabbath day, and in the gospel, Jesus in Jerusalem on the Sabbath day again. Both gather with crowds outside the gates of the city, these places of coming and going, these places of crossing over, these places of leaving and coming back. Paul gathers at the gate and the river with a group of women. Jesus gathers at the gate near a pool with invalids. Interesting term, invalids, invalids. From the Latin, weak, blind, lame, paralyzed. Those seen to be lesser human beings because of their inferior bodies. And healing happens. Grace happens. Inspiration occurs. Words of healing and hope and new life are shared by people who are doing two things. They are both savoring and saving, enjoying and improving. They are living conflicted lives, but choosing to move to a new place of hope. So when they go back through the gate, they are changed. They are a different person. They are in a different place. Lydia, the woman in Acts with Paul, has an open heart, we're told. She's listening to what Paul is saying, and she grabs hold of that promise, the possibility of new life, a new spiritual beginning. And in Jerusalem, Jesus asks the invalid of 38 years this seemingly strange question. Do you want to be made well? And the man talks of his difficulty in physically moving, being able at the right time to make it to the pool because other people are trying to get to the pool, the place of healing. But it is as if Jesus is speaking about the man's heart or his soul, his desire, not his ability, but rather, are you ready for this? Are you open and ready for a new beginning? Have you surrendered to the possibility of a spiritual rebirth? Jesus says, stand up, take up your mat, and walk. And it miraculously happens. And I wonder sometimes about these miracle stories, what happens afterwards to this man? After 38 years of lying down. And perhaps that is why Jesus asks that question. If he really wants to be healed, are you ready to go back through the gate and make a life? Are you ready to keep going even though it's going to be challenging? It will be new, yes, but it will still be hard. And this brings us back to Jesus' core teaching. That is this: it is possible. It is possible to find peace, to find love, to have joy in a conflicted world. But you must be grounded, rooted in the experience of love, of being loved unconditionally, of compassion. No matter what happens in the world, no matter how heavy your heart is, your heart. Because this love, this grace is strong and it will carry you. It will carry you back across the crossing, back through the gate, back into your everyday living. Jesus knew that we always live in this liminal space, this in-between space, between the old and the new, between the past and the future. And our desire matters as we sit there, as we're conflicted. Our desire matters. Reverend Nikki, Debbie Thomas and I have been a part of a church conference training. It's called CCD, the College for Congregational Development, which reminds me of, that's what my Roman Catholic catechism was called when I was a kid. So when I hear CCD, I get all nervous. I have to leave the baseball game and go to some boring class. But the College for Congregational Development, and sometimes we study organizational development stuff. and apply it to the church, to our parish, to the community. And recently we looked at a model called the Bridges Transition, about from moving from one place to another for a business or for a person, for a community. And so there's 3 phases to this simple model. The first phase is that there's been some kind of ending, right? There's some kind of losing. There's some kind of letting go because things have changed, things have happened, things we don't control. The second phase is a neutral zone, which I call the conflicted zone. This liminal space, right? It's that space between that Jesus' teaching addresses. Do you want to be made well? So that obviously is the third space, the new beginning. And I think this is what Paul was preaching, obviously. It's what we preach in church. It's what baptism is. When Lydia and her husband were baptized there in Philippi, they go into the water, they die to themselves. They are leaving something behind, and they are moving towards something new that is promising, that will transform everything in some way, hopefully. That will be a new beginning. The same with the lame or paralyzed man at the pool of Beth Zata, which means house of mercy or house of grace, where the disgraced hope for healing, for a new beginning. So one interesting thing about this model of transition, ironically named after a man named Bridges, is that we all carry the experience of these phases, these zones with us. We don't just, go from one to the other. It makes us who we are. We remember, we grieve, we carry the anxiety. And yet people are in different phases as well. So they may be really stuck in a grief time. And somehow by grace, hopefully they can move to a new beginning. And Jesus seems to be preaching this truth. We can all put ourselves in another person's place. Empathy. We can have empathy and resist our own fear, our own discouragement, our own fatigue, and simply listen. Simply be present. Simply open our own hearts and say, what can I do to both savor and save? Empathize and move towards the promise of new beginning. How can I do so with compassion and patience? I sometimes think this is what Jesus must have prayed when he went off by himself, when he was tired himself, when he saw the horrors around him in an oppressive society, in a society of poverty. He was just praying for endurance, praying for patience, praying to be able to move in hope to a new beginning, to new stability, to new strength, to rest and be strengthened by the knowledge that he was loved and that he was called to love. So I want to end with a prayer today. And I invited 6 people before the service to come help me. So a little visual prayer. If people could stand behind the altar here. For David. So, St. Mark's has a theological theme. Don't show it yet. Each year, to try to capture our journey. So, you guys can turn these around. Not yet. This is well thought out and well rehearsed. One at a time. When I read the name, not before, to say a prayer to capture the theme And the theme for me personally was inspired by people's reaction to this stained glass window that we humbly observe of Jesus' crucifixion, and yet he seems grounded and yet rising at the same time. That the cross has become the symbol of light and new beginning, right? So the theme is rooted and rising. Rooted and rising. So I want to end the sermon with a prayer, beginning with rooted. Holy God, may we be grounded in the example of Christ and desire what is good, loving, beautiful, and healing. Inspiration. May we seek ways to be inspired by the stories of faithful people, by our community, our neighbors, our friends, by strangers. Stability. May we be steadfast, committed, and devoted. Integrity. May we be honest about the reality of both good and evil, harm and hope. Necessities. May we be intentional about the hard work before us and do what is necessary. Gracefulness. May we be patient and forgiving with ourselves and others. And so may we wake up each day rooted in what is true in the past and rising, living into our hopeful desires for blessed new beginnings in the name of Christ. Amen.